Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this new session of the 2020 Global Fleet Virtual Conference. I am really happy that you are with us today for this session called Regional Updates from Global Experts to keep your strategy future-proof. And please don't forget that you can follow the complete conference via the event app on Attendify, where you can also consult the program, interact with speakers and network with participants. Make use of it because it is your conference. Well, as international fleet managers, you need to bear in mind that when going global, there is still, of course, a need to think regional and even local. The implementation of vehicle policies, the application of taxation, the selection of supplier services. These are only a few elements that depend on regional and local market dynamics. The outbreak of COVID-19 across continents and the current heterogeneous approach regarding the softening of the lockdown are underpinning the relevance to discuss market trends. And it's a real pleasure to introduce to you three regional fleet experts that will support me in picturing the global fleet market trends according to regional market specifics. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Yves Helven, Global Fleet Expert for APAC, Pascal, Global Fleet Expert and Chairman of the Fleet LatAm Advisory Board, and last but not least, Antich, Editor and Associate Publisher of Automotive Fleet, and also our partner with the organization of the Global Fleet Conference. Now, the most important thing, of course, is that everyone is safe, and it's also important that we can stay safe during the complete global conference. Gentlemen, first things first. You are specialists according to a region, and I would like to know if, let's say, in 1 minute and a half, you can describe the essential elements of your region in terms of fleet management, things to know, trends, and so on. And I would like to start with Mike, as Mike is far away from us. Mike, hello. So can you a little bit describe the essentials of the North American fleet market?
Yes, happy to do so, Stephen. I'll be representing and giving you a description of two markets, the United States and Canada. And I'll start with the larger of the two markets, the United States. It is the second largest fleet market in the world in terms of total units of operation. The largest, of course, being Europe. The key difference between Europe and the United States is the United States is a single market, single taxation system, single government with states versus an aggregation of different countries. The United States currently has 16 million vehicles in operation. That includes all fleet segments such as government, daily rental, utilities, commercial fleets. Commercial fleets represent approximately 6 million of those vehicles. Out of the 6 million vehicles, they're managed by 410,000 fleets in the United States. About half of them are owned fleets, half of them are leased fleets, approximately. The other market that I'd like to discuss and give an overview on is Canada. And when thinking of Canada in relation to the United States, it's usually a rule of thumb that it's 1/10 of the size. Similar to the United States, Canada is primarily made up of smaller fleets. The United States, the majority of our fleets are under 100 units. In Canada, the average fleet size is about 30 vehicles. It's primarily a service economy and is very much a regional market. In Ontario, Quebec, it's primarily manufacturing based. Western Canada, primarily in the extraction business, either extraction of minerals or oil. But there are a lot of similarities between the two markets, and both are economically integrated together.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, I know that you didn't talk about Mexico, also seen within North America, but for the global fleet community, we have defined that as one of the main countries of Latin America, and we are pleased to have our LatAm expert, Pascal with us. Pascal, for you the same. Can you describe a little bit the Latin American fleet market?
Sure, I will be very quick and will not go market per market, otherwise it will take the whole conference. So total registration for the continent. So the subcontinent is 5.7 million cars, which is about 7% of all the registration in the world. The main three markets are Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, which altogether represent 76% of the market. Now, the corporate market represents 20% of all the markets, so more or less 1.2 million cars registered in a year. New contract in fleet management were about 250,000 last year, which is about 4% of the global market or 20% of the corporate market, meaning that there is a large opportunity for growth. And in 2019, we estimated the growth of the market around 30% through penetration of the product. Active leasing contracts in the continent are around 800,000 cars. You have international players, ALD, Arval Element, and LeasePlan, and they are competing with significant local players, which generally combine renting with fleet management.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And then we have Yves Helven, our specialist on Asia Pacific, not the most easy continent to describe, but can you give a few details about that marketplace, Yves?
Of course, Stephen, and first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Asia. Let's get to the facts and figures. Asia has anywhere between 2 and 3.5 million lease contracts, most of which are in Japan and Australia. The number of fleet sales is a big blur because only Australia provides for some kind of reliable reporting on fleet sales. In terms of financial models, Japan and Australia are leasing countries, but outright purchase is the default for most companies in other countries. The biggest Asian leasing companies, both at roughly 1 million cars, are Oryx and Sumitomo, and they are pretty much present in all the main markets. So that's ANZ, Japan, South and Southeast Asia. China is a bit of an odd one out. Operational leasing is not very popular, stagnates at about 30,000 contracts per year. Now, talking about the overall maturity of the fleet market, that is pretty low in Asia. Again, with Australia being the only country offering products and services at a, let's say, European or North American level. Leasing in Japan is mature and actually very good from an operational point of view, but the Japanese leasing companies offer extremely standardized contracts. The biggest obstacle that we face in Asia is that the automotive and leasing market operate in a very fragmented way, without any regional approach. So from a leasing perspective, but also from an OEM perspective, it means that you will have to negotiate locally, and that it's very challenging to put a regional agreement in place, and that you will have to deal with the fact that not all countries operate at the same level of maturity. So finally, we have a small presence of European leasing companies in the region. It's worth mentioning that ALD is now by far the most active European leaseco, thanks to their joint venture with Mitsubishi Bank.
Okay, thank you very much. And for Europe, well, it's probably the most mature fleet market across the globe. One of the, let's say, typical things about the European fleet marketplace is that it's a marketplace where in several countries the concept of the benefit car is well developed. So this means that there are not only tool cars, but that also in relation to the salary package, a car is given to certain positions within the company. According to the statistics of 2019, we can imagine that there is a bit more than 4 million to 4.5 million new fleet registrations for passenger cars in the European Union. You can imagine that this is depending on the size of the market. So the biggest fleet markets are Germany, the UK, France, Spain, and Italy. And then, of course, what is really important and interesting is the fact that due to the situation that we have now 27 countries in the European Union, each one has its own taxation scheme, but those taxation schemes are often based on CO2, which has stimulated, let's say, the trend for more sustainable, more eco-friendly cars and also electric vehicles, although that there is still a way to go. But we see that traditionally Europe was, let's say, in terms of powertrains, a diesel market, and that this, since a few years, is now shrinking. Then finally on Europe, it's also a marketplace in which there is quite some activity still in pilots when it comes to new mobility solutions, because this could be an add-on or an alternative for those employees that have a company car. So this was a little bit the first topic. Let's now move on with probably one of the things that everyone concerns, and this is the current pandemic, the impact on the marketplace, and also how to get out of there. So I would like to see with you, how do you see, let's say, our industry and your market go into the new normal? And for me, for example, I think that what we have seen in Europe is that although that 2020 started with still some stable fleet sales figures, that in March, according to Dataforce, this is a company specialized in data intelligence, that in March there was already a decline of more than 40% in fleet sales in Europe, and in April even more than 75%. So it's obvious that due to the travel restrictions, the lockdowns, that the business has seriously dropped. And we also see that there is somehow a pressure on innovation, electrification and mobility, because the investments that are probably now happening will be more on how to keep our core business running and how to keep our employees running, and perhaps a little bit less on innovation. So it could be that also in the upcoming months, let's say the trends that we have seen happening in Europe could be a little bit blocked, let's say, by this COVID-19 situation. Then finally, due to the fact that many cars have stand still, most fleet managers also expect a drop in the total cost of ownership. For sure, because there will be a decrease in the maintenance cost, the tires and so on. So this could be, let's say, a positive thing on the cost efficiency side. I don't know, Pascal, from your view, how do you think that fleets and the industry will go back into the new normal with the impact of COVID-19?
You want to talk about Latin America or generally speaking?
You can, of course, talk about Latin America because that's why you are here. But if you have a comment to make on another region, then please, you are welcome.
Okay, I will start with Latin America, where the virus came a little bit later. Now the virus is going into its peak. Brazil being one of the most affected countries. Peru and Chile are still in total confinement. And in the continent, the big difference is that you have millions of poor people which can't respect the measures that they need to get out in search of work and food. So the impact will be devastating, probably speaking, in Latin America and not yet measured. We have already some interesting indicators that we got from Geotab about the traffic. We could see that in Argentina, Chile and Peru, the traffic was down by more than 50% in March and April, and back into minus 40% in May. In Mexico, it was down about 25%, and in Brazil, it was almost normal, giving an indication about what was happening. And we also had some figures coming from a survey that Nexus has made about the ban. And we can see that 80% of the companies that answered had installed a ban. And then 70% of fleet managers were saying that their businesses have lost revenues. And we have no indication about business continuity. So, and then on the leasing company side, in Latin America again, they were facing a lot of difficulty to register cars because local authorities were closed. And for that reason, they were unable to put an end on contract or to deliver new cars. Mm-hmm. So another topic which is interesting is about maintenance, because many shops were closed, so it was difficult to have a car repair. So the situation is tough. Mm-hmm. And maybe we will talk a bit later about how to recover, but I just wanted to give you a picture of what's happening.
Okay. Indeed, also in Europe, of course, we see that there was no possibility to order new vehicles and also to return the vehicles end of contract. So there were quite some extensions of the contracts. Yves, can you picture a little bit what the impact was in APAC? Of course, the COVID-19 crisis started in APAC. What is your view on that?
Yeah, of course, I recognize what Pascal just highlighted for Latin America, right? So traffic is down, car sales are down, and car sales have taken a big hit. The predictions nowadays are that the automotive market will perform like between 10 and 20% less than last year, depending on the country. The bigger issue for Asia is that our growth in 2019 was already a bit less than our growth in 2018. So this might not sound dramatic, but if you look at Asia, that has been investing massively over the last 20 years, and all of these investments are based on predictions of continuous annual growth. So if we don't deliver the growth, the banking system will suffer and the rest of the economy will be following. So that's like the worst case scenario. On the other hand, in Asia, we've already had 3 severe financial crises over the last 2 decades. And most of our businesses have recovered pretty well and have become very flexible because of that. So recovery from the previous crisis was fast, was efficient, and we're hoping that the economy will pick up soon. And we are already seeing positive signals now.
Okay, very good. North America then, Mike Antich, how do you see, let's say, the recovery of the fleet management business in your country, in your continent, also depending, let's say, on the impact that COVID-19 has had and still has, probably?
Well, first of all, I think it's too early to say. We shut down our industry and economy around the middle of March. So we're only 2.5 months into this. And this disruption has been unprecedented. We shut down our entire automotive manufacturing industry, shut down the auction industry. There's been a collapse of the daily rental industry. 2 major rental companies are now in bankruptcy. So companies have been unable to order vehicles. All of the manufacturers have now started remanufacturing vehicles, but it's a gradual startup. The anticipation is this is going to take us through the balance of this calendar year. The other thing is just recently completed or in the midst of completing a buying inclination survey for the 2021 model year. And interestingly, most of the manufacturers will be buying, or most of the fleets will be buying around the same volume of vehicles as what they're anticipating. Some are actually even thinking more because their production of 2020 models have decreased. Now, there are a number of companies that will produce less because of budget constraints. Most of our companies have been operating without cash flow for the past several months. Those that have been deemed non-essential. Essential businesses, their businesses have been pretty good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Interesting topic that you brought up with, of course, the fact that automotive production has stopped because the factories were shut down. There were also some questions in terms of what can we expect in terms of the trend towards fleet electrification. And because with the borders closed, there was also, let's say, a hiccup in the supply of the batteries and the parts for those vehicles. At the other hand, there was no business, there were no new orders and so on. So let's say that there was somehow a logical correlation between both of them. And what we are seeing and what we are thinking somehow in Europe is that fleet electrification will move on. And perhaps it will even move faster than before, because due to the pandemic and the fact that we are now used to work at home, probably there could be a situation in which we will have to do less trips and less miles. And so it could also be that, let's say, the appetite for the right vehicle, an electric vehicle for those kind of trips that you need to do, could be increased. So let's say that it's not yet sure how the situation will evolve, but in Europe, if we listen now to the car manufacturers and also the leasing companies, but for sure the fleets, because they responded in our COVID-19 survey, more than 60% said that there was no change in their strategy according to EVs, and even 25% said that it will probably accelerate. Then we think indeed that the greenification and the electrification of the fleet will continue in Europe. I know, Yves, that in APAC, for example in China, they made huge investments when it comes to fleet electrification. How do you think that fleet electrification will evolve for APAC then over the upcoming period?
Yeah, it's going to be slightly different from Europe, right? In the sense that, you know, when you look at, for instance, the TCO of electrification, or the investment that a company needs to do in electrification, is still pretty high for Europe, right? If you look at the Tesla is about what, 40,000 euro, give or take, starts and then upwards. So in Asia, I think we have the advantage that our locally produced EVs are a lot cheaper and less high tech than the Western brands. Electric, like you say, has been on the Chinese roadmap for a few years, and it's mandated by government, so TCO is less relevant, right? And this is an Asian reality. Electrification will not be pushed by the client, it will be mandated by government. So having said this, our charging infrastructure is still not good. And here again, we're waiting for some serious governmental involvement. So what I do know, and this is an Asian reality, is that once electrification makes it to the top of the agenda, it will go fast. So slightly different from Europe. In Europe, you need that client incentive. In Asia, you need that governmental incentive.
Okay. Pascal, in Latin America, is there, let's say, an appetite for fleet electrification, and how do you see that going forward?
Okay, I think that the topic is much less sensitive than it is in Europe. And from a personal point of view, I don't believe that COVID will have a major impact on this particular matter. Also remember that in Brazil, more than 80% of the fleet is equipped with ethanol, which is considered also as a green power. So there is no push in Brazil at all. And the only push that there is in Latin America for electrification is in very big cities where local authority are sometimes putting a ban on cars to travel. And if you have an hybrid car or an electric car, you can travel. So some companies have been switching their fleet to electricity, but it is very expensive. So it's not a very big trend for the time being, even if we can see there and there some efforts like the buses in Colombia or stuff like that. But it's certainly not a key issue, and nothing, I would say, with a different trend after COVID. Well, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And finally, Mike Antich from Los Angeles for North America. I know that petrol and oil are cheap. Is electrification a topic on the mind of the fleet managers in North America?
It will be growing, because if you look at the manufacturer future product plans, we'll be having a lot of electric vehicles entering the marketplace in the coming model years. The big concerns that fleets have had in the past with electrification has been range, the cost, total cost of ownership, limited infrastructure, recharging infrastructure, and battery life, especially in winter regions of the countries. So those have been the initial stumbling blocks. The other thing has been the availability of electric vehicles that are vocational specific, that can be used by vocational fleets. That is changing. We will be having some all-electric pickup trucks entering the marketplace. We'll have all-electric vans entering the marketplace, and that'll serve the needs and satisfy the objections for a number of fleets. But I think this country, the United States, has a great opportunity ahead of it. We're currently stimulating the economy with these massive spending bills in the trillions of dollars. There is discussion about trying to reach some sort of political consensus to launch an infrastructure bill. And my feeling is this is a great opportunity potentially to create that electric recharging infrastructure within our country. If we were to put these charging stations along the major interstates as part of this infrastructure bill, it creates jobs, and it solves that problem of having ready ability to recharge your vehicle wherever you're located. So I think the future is promising, but there still are a lot of headwinds in regards to the adoption of electric vehicles by commercial fleets in the United States.
Okay, thank you. Would like just to ask Pascal, because you of course have also an extensive experience when it comes to the fleet marketplace on a global level and for sure in Europe. What we are seeing in Europe in terms of infrastructure is that there is a huge difference between the infrastructure that is built between the countries. Yes, so in the Netherlands and in Norway, for example, you have a complete other situation than in Italy, Belgium, and so on. Do you think that in terms of infrastructure, there should be, let's say, more initiative also taken from the European Union to make sure that we can move towards a more greener fleet and an electric fleet?
I think it will come as an obligation. I think in Europe, the decision has been taken by the authority to punish the manufacturers if they are not decreasing the CO2 emission. By the way, it's interesting to understand whether or not they will keep this objective of 95 with manufacturers which are in great difficulty. But if they keep this objective, it means that whether or not you get the infrastructure, the manufacturers have to sell electric vehicles if they don't want to pay a fine. So what will happen is that people will use electric car for a low range, I believe, and they will install charges at home or in the offices, independently from the fact that you will have enough infrastructure, because I do believe that infrastructure will likely come last.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next topic, that is the residual value risk. And I would like to address that to Mike Antich. Mike, for North America, we know, of course, that most of the fleets, let's say, work in a so-called open-end leasing environment, where in Europe this is often done in a closed end. Now, in an open end, the financial risk lays with the end customer, so with the fleet client. This could, of course, be in this situation when we have a crisis, lead to some kind of, let's say, a challenge for them in reselling the vehicles at a good price. What is your advice, and is perhaps also that model under pressure or on the question?
No, I don't believe the model's under pressure. Closed-end leases have been around for a long period of time. Leases, as you mentioned, is the predominant form of funding using a lease mechanism. The advantages there for fleets in the United States is that it allows them to influence what their monthly payment is, depending on how much residual or depreciation risk they take. And also, when you look at the fleet market historically, the used car market has traditionally been strong in the United States. It is almost 10 times as large as the new car market in the United States. So although we may be experiencing issues with soft resale values at the moment, do not expect that to continue for long periods of time, because when you look at new vehicles that are purchased by fleets, one of the things that they're doing is they're manufacturing the used vehicles that are going to come into the market 3 years from now. And with the interruption of new vehicle production that occurred in the 2020 model year, and as we ramp up slowly with the 2021 model year, the feeling is that in the next 3 years, we will experience a shortage of used vehicles in the marketplace. So by maintaining that open-end lease, where the lessee benefits from the increases in resale value, that actually proves to their benefit. So I think there is not a risk to the open-end lease model in the United States, and I think it'll continue, and they'll benefit from a stronger used vehicle market that'll be on the horizon.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Pascal, in Latin America, let's say apart from Mexico, I think that we can say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if companies choose for outsourcing and for another finance model, let's say, than outright purchasing, that often they will choose for closed-end leasing like we know it in Europe. Why is that?
Yeah, I will answer your question, but if you allow me, I would like to answer to Mike, because I think there is a little confusion in between residual values and used car sale. What's happening now, as Mike has said, it's a drop in used car market, both in Latin America, well, almost around the world. Mm-hmm. And the best example of that is if you look into the publication of LeasePlan and ALD at the end of Q1, they made huge provision on their inventories. The price of the provision was about 800 euro a car, more or less, on their inventory, which means that they are anticipating a drop of about 10% on the used car market for the coming months. But this doesn't mean, as Mike was saying, because there is no difference from that point of view between closed end and open end, you always need to monitor the used car market and your residual value. But your residual value is the price you put today for a car you will sell in 3 or 4 years' time. So what's happening now is that the one owner of the car, whether it's a lease company for the closed-end model or the customer for the open-end model, will lose money if he has to sell the car immediately. The benefit of the open-end model is that you can choose when you sell the car. In the closed-end model, the customer decides to sell the car and the leasing company have to sell the car, full stop. And if the market has dropped, like it is the case, he will make a big loss. So the leasing company has to convince his customer to extend the contract. And this is exactly what's happening. So when you go into Latin America is exactly the same model. But there is a big difference on the used car market, and this is linked to the currency. Most cars are a very high level of component coming from Japan, the US, or Europe. And all the cars that are sold in Latin America, even when they are produced in Latin America, have a high component of imported spare parts. So what we can expect in Latin America is that the price of a new car might increase a lot in the coming months because currencies have been depreciating. For instance, the peso depreciated almost 30% against the dollar in March. And same thing for the Brazilian real, just 20%, and in Colombia too. So if the price of new cars is increasing a lot because of the depreciation of the currency in local currency, the drop of the price of used car in the market will probably be compensated. And what it means is that the price of a new contract for a new car might be much higher than the price you have for the existing contract. So this will be an argument for contract extension. So this is a very complex situation because the residual value might remain at the same level because in 3 or 4 years' time, you will have a shortage of cars. The used car market will drop in Europe for sure, will drop in Latin America, but compensated by the weakness of the currency. But I foresee in Latin America a potential increase on the contract on new cars because of currency issues and interest rate issues.
Okay.
Is that understandable?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for the expertise. Yves, for APAC, is there residual value risk, or is the market still, let's say, so expanding and extending that everything goes well and everything can be coped with?
Good question. So Asia, once again, there's Japan, there's Australia, potentially Korea, and then there's the rest of Asia, right? So we're talking about either the leasing countries or the outright purchase countries. In the outright purchase countries, you can say one thing is that the second-hand market might be immature from an organizational point of view, but very strong from a value point of view. So don't forget that we have very low car penetration in Asia, and that the demand for affordable cars is very high because our middle class is growing very fast. So obviously consumers are postponing big investments, but this reflects more to new car sales than to second-hand car sales. So all in all, situation is much better than what Mike just described for the US. When we look at Japan, it's a very specific market. Residual values or contractual residual values for leasing are very low in Japan compared to Europe. And that is because the second-hand market for Japanese leasing cars is not domestic. It's not second-hand cars or old leasing cars are not being sold within Japan, but they're being transported to mainly Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Middle East. And these values are being determined by the demand in these countries rather than by the intrinsic value of a vehicle after 3 or 4 years. So all in all, less dramatic than in the other regions.
Okay. Does this mean that you foresee that there will still be, let's say, growth of the fleet volumes in Latin America? In APAC, now I'm confusing the regions with the experts, or do you also expect somehow already sort of a break on the growth in terms of fleet volumes, perhaps also due to the pandemic that we have had and to the fact that we are now used to work from home?
It's a very complex question, and once again you need to split the different regions. And let's take Japan as the biggest leasing market, right, in Asia with plus 2 million cars. What we're seeing in Japan is less defined by the automotive of the leasing industry. Japan is traditionally a very analog market, which means that if you look at the total fleet size of Japan, which is roughly about 2+ million vehicles, that is determined by the need of analog business models. So basically, Japanese fleet size is today the same as it was like 20 years ago, roughly. Now, the one thing that we see with Corona and after Corona is that Japanese businesses have started to digitize. So when we think about Japan, we think about hyper modern companies and flashy buildings and so on. The reality is that Japanese companies still work on mainframes and they still use fax machines, right? That's the reality. COVID has started basically digitization. With digitization, we anticipate less need of company cars. So for the biggest markets, what I foresee, not really short term, but at least medium term, is that the fleet sizes are going to decrease instead of increase.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's the same, I think, that I expect for Europe, for sure for the benefit cars, where you also see that there is a new workforce coming into play that perhaps values the company car in a different way than I did when I started working. So I'm not talking about those tool fleets because this depends on the business. But I think, and that is also what we are seeing in the survey that we did, that there might be a decline in the fleet volumes due to the pandemic and the fact that we are working from home. What is your reaction on that, Pascal, in general and for LatAm?
I think in general and for LatAm, I think it's the same with different emphasis. I think that big fleets will decrease because the COVID has just demonstrated that we are not efficient in working. We can use digital, we don't need to move so much. So mileage will reduce and the fleet managers will be looking for different alternatives. Short-term renting, Uber, this kind of stuff combined with contract at a longer term. But at the same time, I anticipate a development of the corporate sales going to smaller company. So what I anticipate is a reduction of the existing fleet, which are the bulk of the portfolios, but this will be highly compensated by the development of fleet management for smaller companies or even for private. So I don't see a big danger for the leasing companies. The leasing company have a very big market. There is just a switch that we will see and more space for a smaller customer. So I think there is more danger for the OEMs because globally they will sell less car. And an interesting thing that the managing director of Renault said today, he said that the plan of reducing staff and plants is not due to COVID. It was already there 3 or 4 months ago. So COVID is not the only crisis. I think COVID has made and demonstrate that we are not efficient. And many things are happening now because of COVID, because things that would have taken 3 or 4 years to happen have happened in 1 or 2 months. So we will probably have to leave with 15 or 20% unemployment because we are more productive, and this is what we wanted to avoid first. So coming back to the fleet, I think big fleet will reduce, but globally the fleets will increase.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Mike, do you expect that fleets will be confronted and fleet managers will be confronted from their management and the organization with a pressure on the budgeting side, because the management perhaps has seen that it can also be done in a different way and not using all the cars that they had before, etc. And perhaps due to the pandemic, there need to be some kind of cost rationalization, and fleet is perhaps in the picture?
Absolutely. Yes, budgets are under scrutiny. Budgets are definitely being strained because of the lack of economic activity that's been happening in the past several months. And all of the fleets are looking at utilization studies, examining where they might be able to eliminate vehicles if needed. Those companies that require vocational vehicles, tool of the trade vehicles, really do not see any sort of dramatic changes there. Where there may be changes is where vehicles are assigned to specific individuals. There could be a tightening of the eligibility in order to get a company car. So it may be more difficult in the coming years. And I think there will be a greater emphasis on working remotely, and likewise doing online virtual communication with customers and clients, especially from the sales standpoint. One of the big issues that's coming up is that a lot of companies are implementing protocols before people can actually enter their premises. So, there may be temperatures that are required. They may actually discourage people attending. So that could put downward pressure on company assigned vehicles. But on the whole, I don't see our industry changing too much in terms of overall numbers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mike. And then final round of questions linked a little bit to the key market trend that you see happening for your region. So what is a little bit the thing that is happening in your region and that you are saying, okay, this is something that a global fleet manager should know about, but it will probably impact also the strategy that he or she has for that region in the upcoming future? Let's start with Yves for APAC.
Yeah, so in terms of the most remarkable trend, there's over 50 countries in APAC, so and 4.5 billion people. So it's difficult to pinpoint one specific trend. But if I have to pick one difference with other regions, I would mention the speed at which the region is developing, especially on digitization. Let me give you one example. Since I moved, I'm dialing in from Hasselt, but I moved to Asia about 7 years ago. I gave up my company car 7 years ago. I stopped using my mobile phone provider to call people, and I also stopped using my bank for payments. So nowadays I use Grab, Line, WeChat, and WhatsApp and so on. So what I want to say here is that Asia is constantly challenging the status quo, is using much more digital solutions, and that's also going to reflect on the utilization of mobility. So I do foresee that a big part of the need for professional miles is going to be filled in with digital solutions, with mobility solutions.
Okay, thank you. Mike, for the North American marketplace, what would be your main takeaway for global fleet managers?
As Yves had mentioned, there is a digital transformation occurring among most companies, and using that and incorporating that in their sales and customer service processes. But in terms of dramatic changes within the industry, I've been in the industry long enough to know that people talk about dramatic changes, but the reality is, if you look in the past, change does not happen overnight. There's a lot of inertia within the industry. I really do not anticipate our business changing too dramatically in the near term. A lot of it's going to do with the types of products that the manufacturers introduce. And there will also be a lot of pressures in terms of the acceptance of technology in communicating and servicing your customers, which will put downward pressure on fleets.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Pascal Serre for Latin America. What is the key market trend to follow for the global fleet managers?
Listening what the most talented fleet manager was saying 2 or 3 days ago in a conference I think they are all expecting innovation. They want to have more flexible product. They want to reduce their fleet. And when they're talking about flexibility, they consider that the drivers will drive much less. So they will extend their contract on the one hand. At the same time, they will not go from home to the office so often. They will reduce the numbers of visits. Exactly the same thing that Mike was mentioning, and I think that this will also happen in Europe. Mm-hmm. So I think that we will have an acceleration of mobility concept, and they will be looking for a combination of fleet and short term and taxis and stuff like that. And we need to find a combination. Whether someone will be able to integrate or the fleet manager will have to do that with different suppliers, I don't know. But I agree with Mike. Nothing will change dramatically, but we will have a certain acceleration because of the crisis.
Okay, I think that you are right. I confirm. I think that for Europe, there will be a nice triangle to follow between electrification, mobility and digitization. Now, the most important thing is that we look forward, that we stay positive, that we take the time to reflect on what we have learned, and that we also take the time to invest also in innovation. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We have to close this panel discussion. I hope that you liked it. I think that it was great to have you with us in the Global Fleet Virtual Conference. Thank you very much, Yves Helven, Pascal Serre and Mike Antich. I'm sure also that our audience has received valuable insights about the main fleet regions. And so to everyone, it was really a pleasure being your moderator. If you like this session, also give your feedback and share your thoughts on the event app Attendify. And don't forget that we have also upcoming sessions. So on Tuesday, there will be a video podcast on how to make your global fleet strengths work in North America with David Madrigal of Element Fleet Management. And there is a webinar on Wednesday about corporate mobility in the new normal. So we will deep dive into trends in mobility. And this webinar will be organized with CMAS. And then on Friday, we will have the podcast on the new economic and social reality with Professor François Gemène. So it's really a week not to be missed. And for now, stay safe and may you have a healthy global fleet journey. Thank you. Bye-bye.